Hello, this is Sharina Joshi, and I will continue my lectures on the Caribbean world and Brathwaite as part of the New Literatures in English, Caribbean Poetry, MEG 8, Block 6. Last time I was talking about the post-colonial experience, and today I will continue that by talking about how there is resistance and assertion. You know, the question of identity, race, and history. It is around this that you are going to have the first movements, pan-black, across the African as well as the Caribbean and American world. And one of the major movements at that time was a movement that we call negritude. Negritude is a neologism first used by Aimé Césaire in 1939 in his poem A Notebook on a Return to My Native Land, in which he says, negritude, not a cephalic index or a plasma or a soma, but measured by the compass of suffering. So negritude referred at that time to the collective identity of the African diaspora, born out of the experience of the Middle Passage and of slavery, right across from the coast of West Africa, from where the Yoruba, the Congo, and the Ashanti were shipped across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and then to the USA. And the concept also finds roots in a variety of writers, begun by Aimé Césaire, taken on by Senghor. It is going to be a debate, but also something that affirmed and asserted a black identity. You know, to be black is to be beautiful. So from Harlem writers like Claude McKay, the Jamaican-born writer, to Langston Hughes, to W.E.B. Du Bois, as well as to French Caribbean politicians like Aimé Césaire, writer, and then going on to take a political office. And they all sought to erase the stigma to the word black, negro, negre, nigger, and the connotation, the pejorative use of this word, nigger. You know, it valorized, it celebrated the African roots, and it found itself actually, you know, like the North American, Afro-American culture, blues, soul, jazz. It found itself in Caribbean, you know, celebrating the Afro-Caribbean and African culture, which survived, even though forced underground, in the music, like the calypso, the crick-crack folk tales, and much, much more. Self-assertion did not just happen, though negritude is so significant because it united black peoples across the Atlantic. You know, right through the Atlantic. But also, you know, the assertion is also there in resistance. Very clear resistances, overt resistance, like, you know, revolts that took place, like the Bussa revolt in Barbados, for example, and, you know, the escaped slaves who formed maroon communities, but also things like theft, arson, pretended, you know, laziness, ideas of, or showing that you do not understand, as if you are mentally inferior. It is not that they were mentally inferior, but they, you know, that was their way of sabotaging the colonial presence. And there is a lot that is written on it, especially in the case of Africa. So the whole idea of resistance is significant. Negritude is also very, very important because negritude is something that now is, of course, debatable because it took on two forms. One was Senghor's, you know, that there is a greatness, a nobility to the black population, to the African world, that it was paradise. Amy Césaire's negritude is also aimed at being very self-conscious. So he writes, "My negritude is not a stone, its deafness dashed against the clamor of the day. My negritude is not an opaque spot of dead water on the dead eye of the earth. My negritude is neither a tower nor a cathedral. It plunges into the red flesh of the soil. It plunges into the ardent flesh of the sky. It pierces opaque prostration with its upright patience." So what you recognize over here is, this whole idea of being rooted to the elements, of being, not something that is constructed, but something that is self-conscious, and that through this self-consciousness, you will achieve true freedom. The Caribbean world, however, even though they talked about negritude, soon had to realize in a way that negritude is only one part, okay? And the Caribbean affirmation of its identity, of its history, of its language, came from something that was born after that, okay, in the 50s, and in which Edward Brathwaite plays a very significant role, and that is Creole and Creolization. So what the term Creole means really is, the mixture of race, language, ethnicity characterized by interdependence. You have, the white master, the black slave, the brown indentured labor, the white indentured labor, with their different languages, their different ethnicities, their different race, their different cultures. And they lived side by side, and somewhere there is a symbiotic or at least an interdependent relationship between them. So what Creole does is to reject the mythologization and idealization of Africa in the idea of negritude. It affirms the heterogeneity of the Caribbean. Okay, the nativization of the European languages takes place. What happens is that French and English and Spanish mix with African languages, as well as the Indian languages, the East Indian languages, as well as remnants of the old indigenous languages. And what emerges out of that is Creole. Maybe you can understand what Creole is when you look at a language like Urdu, or you look at a language like, the Mumbaiya Hindi, where you have a mix of so many, rhythms and language that come from different parts of India. Or Urdu, which has, words from Braj and Awadhi, as well as Persian, as well as Arabic, and as well as Turkish, and which was born really in the barracks and the roads and the marketplaces of North India, of the Indo-Gangetic Plain. And that is what the term creolization would suggest. Okay, how languages which are considered to be pure, how imperial languages were nativized, as it were. And this also links to the identity that is born, the assumption of a regional identity, a Caribbean identity. It celebrates and incorporates diverse heritages, that come from all parts of the world. And I don't want any one of you to forget it. The dynamics of this intermingling that takes place, because that is what we see in the poetry of the Caribbean, whether it is Walcott or Brathwaite. So it is not that they are not influenced by English writing, by the canon of English literature, or the French literature, or that they can't write in that. Of course they can. They don't only write in it, they write very well in it, and yet they will move away from that and write in the rhythm of their own world. And Creole is also, I mean, it's reflected, as I said, in the native rhythms that continue to coexist. In music also, like reggae, like calypso, like the steel band, like limbo, and like chutney music, which, as you understand, in Trinidad and in Barbados, reflects the music of the Indian community together with some of the rhythms of that world. What you also have to realize is that Creolization and the assertion that I am Creole is also oppositional to Eurocentricity. This whole idea that Europe is, absolutely the superior culture, that anything non-European is inferior, this is an assertion and affirmation of the fused world that is there in the Caribbean. And it is also a counter discourse to official historiography. The history, where have we derived our roots from? Where is it going to take us to, right? And what are we here today? To turn back to the voyages, to the migrancy, to the exile, to the flight, to the return across the waves of the sea. And thus it is Brathwaite, in his rather remarkable work called Creolization in Jamaica, who writes, "From their several cultural bases, people in the West Indies tend towards certain directions, positions, assumptions, and ideals. But nothing is really fixed and monolithic. Although there is white, brown, black, there are infinite possibilities within these distinctions and many ways of asserting identity." And this is the important thing. It's not fixed, it's not monolithic, and there is possibilities and potentialities of asserting identity. And finally, you have neither Europeans nor Africans nor Asians. We proclaim ourselves Creoles. Creoleness is a cement of our culture and can be defined as a fact of belonging to an original human entity, one that derives from the distinct processes that have taken place in the Caribbean. And I would like to add over here this line, this phrase that I have quoted from Bernabe, Chamisso, and Confiant, is that it is the fact of belonging to an original human entity. The divisions collapse, merge, and you recognize what your human entity is. And that is what Caribbean affirmation is. And out of this, we have Caribbean literature. Now, Caribbean did not have any indigenous written tradition. The native tribes had an oral tradition and petroglyphs. The oral tradition of the Tainos and the Arawaks did not survive the Spanish colonization, and therefore the initial written literature, and also remember that the language of the slaves and the indigenous languages and traditions and beats seem to vanish, get subsumed, taken over by European languages. So the language which is also the language of command, the language of officialdom, and initially, of course, the written literature that emerged modeled themselves on European styles, on the imperial colonial languages. However, right from the end of the 18th century, there was a strong liberation movement, and this liberationist sense grew right across the South Americas and Caribbean. And we saw a number of rebellions and independence movements across these areas, and anti-slavery freedom struggles. And when you come to the 20th century, you have a spate of Anglophone and Francophone writers, thinkers, artists. They just emerge and put the Caribbean on the world literary map. So Claude McKay, one of the earliest ones, Jamaican born, and then migrating to the US, and Claude McKay's is a very interesting figure. If you read his poetry, it is written, you know, he's going to influence the Harlem Renaissance. He's going to influence somebody like Langston Hughes and others. But what is very interesting is his early poetry, which is written in what, in quotes, we call dialect poetry. Claude McKay also responded to the lynchings and all that was happening in America, you know, the horror of it. And you should read his poems on lynching and on, you know, black retaliation and on black identity. Then you have Aimé Césaire, a name that is absolutely linked to the Caribbean, to the French Caribbean, and the island of Martinique, from where, you know, you also have Frantz Fanon. And again, Fanon's work, Black Skin, White Masks, is something that, you know, leads us into understanding what happens. And he says that as a colonial subject, you are at the margins and there is a mother country, and the mother country is France, right? And so what happens over there? You grow up learning French. Your parents tell you not to speak Creole because everybody wants an opportunity to go to France or to be employed, you know, in the offices, or become part of that world, to break into that world. And you also are told that you are a human being, the humanist canon. But when you go to France, when you go to England as an Anglophone writer, whether it is Wole Soyinka or whether it is going to be our own, you know, Edward Brathwaite, you are going to have this sense of sudden alienation, the fact that you are, you know, black. So what happens? And, or you are brown, you know, mulatto, mestizo. And you have writers then like Samuel Selvon, Walcott, George Lamming, and of course our Brathwaite. And they, you know, sought a language that expressed the rhythm, culture, and identity of the Caribbean. They sought a language that could express the feelings as well as the thoughts as well as the struggles of their world, of their history. And their culture and identity got linked with the language, the creolization, the rhythms of that. So Creole and Patois, English and French, dialect poetry and nation language. The writers of the Caribbean wrought the language, experimented with language to capture and articulate the uniquely Caribbean experience. So I'm going to read this poem out to you, and I want you to look at it very carefully as you watch this. There is no land that can compare with wherever I roam. In all day world, none like you fair, my native land, my home. Jamaica is the nigger's place, no mind where he some declare. Although them call we no land race, I know we home is here. Why am I reading this? I'm reading this also because this is written in 1912, before McKay left for America, for USA. I want you to notice the pronunciation, the emphasis on D instead of THERE, okay? I want you to notice the use of nigger, the nigger's place, that some declare. And I also want you to notice that how he calls it, that we, the black people, are a no land race, that we don't have a land of our own, okay? I know we home is here, okay, but Jamaica is a home. So as early as that, he's claiming Jamaica for himself. So this is an early poem, and it was called dialect poetry. Even today when you read about it, they say it's dialect poetry. And the word dialect, I'm going to talk about a little now when I come to Brathwaite. And this is my lead to you into Brathwaite's poetry. So Edward Kamau Brathwaite, 11th May 1930, 4th Feb 2020, He is a Barbadian poet, and he's almost the voice of the Caribbean, one of the early voices of the Caribbean, parallels Walcott and Lamming, and other writers, who kept his poetry, as he said, alive, or, there are journals that kept his poetry alive. He himself has founded the sort of Caribbean artist movement, CAM, and he is historian, trained as a historian. He's also a cultural theorist, because he speaks about, as we will just see, that he speaks about the movement of the peoples, of the slaves, and the poet and a performer. That and I would advise you to hear him reciting his poetry on YouTube, with the kind of inflection that comes from his being Barbadian, the inflection in English. And this inflection is crucial in our understanding even of creolization. What is it that it is? And this is what I say. Now, I'll give you an example. I've already told you my name is Sharina, so how many people call me Serena? And that is because it is the inflection of their own native language, okay, and of their own native tongue within India. So if you go towards the east, the sh, sir. If you go somewhere else, the z. You will find all these, if I could call it, inflections. And in inflections, you make your language also, in a way, when it is a colonial language and your own. And that is what we are going to see in Brathwaite's poetry. So Brathwaite is born and educated in Anglophone Barbados, an island which is, of course, one of the most homogeneous. So when Brathwaite talks about, people with African descent or negritude initially, and remember, he's growing up at a time when when all this is happening. It's a time of anti-colonial struggles. It's 30s, and this is a moment of the assertion of pan-black identity. And as he grows into the 50s, right across Africa, from Kenya to Ghana, and in the Caribbean, you're going to have the anti-colonial struggles, at times, very, very violent, like in parts of Kenya and the Mau Mau movement, or when you're looking at Algeria. But it is also the assertion of a pan-black identity. And when he talks about African descent and this submergence of the African culture, the fact that the African culture is submarine, it is also because of the fact that he is in Barbados, and Barbados is more homogeneous than maybe other places, and so 10% or 15% of their population is white and brown and mixed and so on. And he graduated, though he was educated initially in Barbados, he won a scholarship and went to study history at Pembroke College, Cambridge, and later got a doctorate from Sussex University. And it is right when he was in England that the questions of identity and culture enter. The sense of alienation. Anglo-Saxon? Are we Afro-Saxon? What is our identity? What is our culture? Of alienation, of a sense of being an exile, of migrating, of journeying back and of return. And this becomes an interesting point, the personal experience from where, you also come back, you also understand your world. And you can understand it in all its binaries, in all its conflicts, in all its mergings, in minglings. And then he went also to work in Ghana as an education officer. And here, the awareness, of the connection between Africa and the Caribbean deepened. It is here that he takes his name, Kamau. And after that, when he so many times publishes, it's Edward Kamau, or it is Kamau Brathwaite. And, the African as well as the English, Anglophone. And it deepened his understanding of the African experience, and he went on to write extensively on cultural practices, history, and social formations of the region of the Caribbean. So he was one of the major writers who helped to forge a regional identity after the trauma of slavery and colonization. His doctoral thesis, later published, is titled, and notice this, The Development of Creole Society in Jamaica, 1770 to 1820. And he goes on to write Folk Culture of the Slaves, The History of Voice, an excellent, excellent essay that I will advise you to look up and read, and of course Roots. And Roots, which tells you, where are we from, and the root of our identity. So notice the emphasis on voice, on folk culture, that which survives outside the center of the official world. In the streets, in the farms, in the villages, in the mountains, in the terrain, okay? And I want you to remember that. And what he does is to examine the African and indigenous roots of the Caribbean. History of the Voice is, a lecture that he gave, but it is there that he coined the term nation language as against the word dialect with its pejorative use. Arising out of the binary of this, colonial standard official language, pure language versus impure hybrid street language, Brathwaite's term emphasized the vibrancy of the language of slaves and laborers. They made the language of the colonizers, their own through inflection and appropriation. And in the mimicry, which does not remain the same, okay, them becomes dem, and you will hear it in the songs of the rappers, for example. There is a subversion of the official language. This merging is actually the creolization of language. So he goes on to say, national language is a language which is influenced by the African aspect of our New World Caribbean heritage. English it may be in its lexical features, but in contours, its rhythm and timbre, its sound explosions, it is not English. It does not exist in a dictionary, but in the tradition of the spoken word, the oral tradition, based on sound as it is, on song. And we are going to see this word of a nation language, that is there. The nation language is going to be this vibrant world that we are going to see developing in his poetry. Even as he wrote all these books, he really made a mark with his poetry. And I'm not even going to give you a list. You can look at the list anywhere on Google. But his first poem, Rites of Passage, from where we have Wings of a Dove, Masks and Islands, was published as a trilogy called The Arrivants. Okay, Brathwaite, like Walcott, will impact the literary world with his poetry. So numerous books of poetry and numerous awards follow. The Griffin Award, the Newstead Award. He's going to be flooded with awards, and his voice is going to reach out across the Caribbean, into Africa, into America, into then the world literature. So cultural, linguistic and historical concerns are intertwined with autobiographical and aesthetics one. He draws on the rhythm, music and sounds of the Afro-Caribbean world. He phonetically spells words, very much like Claude McKay did. He collapsed words, splits words, creating new meanings. So here it is, a little quote from The Wings of a Dove that we will do next time. And I'm going to look at this. Rise, rise, locks man, solo man, wise man. Rise, 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 lay we laugh them, mock them, stop at them, kill them, and go back, back to the black man land, back, back to Africa. So notice how he breaks it, solo man, and how he creates a neologism. Solo, alone. Solomon, wise man, from the Bible. Okay, and notice how he says rise, rise, rise. Notice the beat. It's literally 1, 2, 1, 2, like you would have in a drum beat, in a heartbeat, in the beat of the reggae, in the beat. And that is what I need in ska music that predated reggae. Mock them, stop at them, kill them, and go back, back to the black man land, which is back, back to Africa. So notice the emphasis, back, back, which is alliteration, but is also a rhythm. Back, back to the black man land, back, back. And this beat I want you to notice when you read their poetry. Thank you.